I remember going and having some work done on my nose and my tonsils when I was about 11. I think when I was something like 3, I had pneumonia and I was in the hospital in New Norfolk. I remember a doctor that was looking after my mum coming up to the farm and just appearing from nowhere and asked could he go rabbit hunting on our property. So, I thought, it looked like something good to do. And I thought, when on the farm, I often treated the cattle. I remember treating mastitis for the cows, and if the cats had bad legs or something, I was always doing things, and I think people thought I'd be a nurse, but it didn't interest me much. I wanted to be in the top because it was just one of those things. You've got to do what's hardest. I think that, it was a case of survival more than anything during the war, during that period of time. We never felt that we were in any way disadvantaged. Country people are very, very able people. Everybody looked after everybody else. Nearly everybody. You always get a few people that aren't cooperative. Being on a farm, there was people took it in turns to do various things like killing an animal for meat and distributing the meat to everybody in the village. And so I learnt very early about how people could cope by being so much in community-minded. Community-minded, that's really what I want to say. I remember my dad, that was 1926, not 1930, was not 1930, and he would walk all the way to New Norfolk, which was 12 miles, to see the bank manager, and he would come back. He would drink water from a creek, and always used to bring us back peanuts, because that was quite a luxury in those days. Yes, well, I'm a country girl, and I was born in New Norfolk, and I noticed that New Norfolk has claimed me, which was rather nice. I started schooling in the country, and then I came to Hobart to do further schooling. I had bad health for a while, and I went back home because I developed measles on the week of our exams. I went home to look after my mum, but I got restless. I got in touch with the education department, and I joined the education department and did some teaching. And then my brothers decided to join the army. And of course I'm very competitive, so I thought if they were in the army, I'm going to join up. So I joined the Air Force. And from then on, my life totally changed. the Air Force took me at the beginning from Hobart to Launceston to Melbourne and to Larundel, which was a psychiatric hospital that they had taken over for the rookie training. And I really enjoyed that. It was really, really something new for me. I made a lifetime friend who was the girl that was next bed to me. They taught us first and foremost how to make a bed. They gave us grey woolen blanket with a blue stripe straight down the middle, and they taught us how to do the hospital corners, which I had no idea about. We learned how to march, we learned the aircraft, and we spent 3 months in Melbourne before being taken by train to Adelaide. When we got to Adelaide, we went to Aquinas College, which is just behind the Church of England Cathedral, and we did another, I can't remember how many months, but it was quite a long time, and we were learning all kinds of skills. I was just so blown away by the wonderful teaching that I got there, and I learned how to make many useful things, because what we were really learning was aeronautical engineering, because I was in the area where we looked after all the instrumentation on the aircraft. And the aircraft that we were working on was Beaufighters, and then one day I saw a big plane coming in. It was a Lancaster, and the Duke of Gloucester got out and weaved his way across the tarmac. I believe that he had an alcohol problem. So that was very interesting. I was teaching, and it came the Christmas break. I'd had breakfast with the inspector of schools, and I said to him, I've been thinking about joining up. And he said, well, you're not allowed to if you're teaching, because all the men are away. And so I waited till the Christmas, and of course I wasn't working over the Christmas, and that's when I slipped down and asked, could I join up? The only permission that they were asked for was, could I go overseas? And they said, no, certainly not. So when I actually got my posting, I didn't realise that I was on an active unit. I did the first year here because there wasn't a medical faculty.
Right.
So I went to this university and then over to Melbourne. And the food, too much. I put on a bit of weight. I really enjoyed everything. My girlfriend that was next bed to me when I first went over, she and I both enjoyed ballet and opera and classical music. And she had been a ballerina, so we had access to good entertainment. And of course, on the unit, we had a lot of entertainment. I was surprised at how much, we had dances and all kinds of things going on to entertain us. the thing that was always remembered mostly was the fact that anybody who went out with a yank was given orchids. That was the period of time when orchids were very, relatively expensive for local people, and it was only when the American sailors and soldiers were here, they used always buy the girls orchids. Reveille, I think, was 7 a.m. and then you had to shower, go for breakfast, then onto the parade ground. I'd go up then to join my unit, and the thing that always impressed me most was the fact that when you get in the aircraft to do the work that you need to do on instrumentation, it's quite a heavy job. I had to lie in the pilot seat with my legs over the back of the seat. I'd get my shoulders and arms and head in below the panel, unscrew the bolts, and often the whole thing would come down bang. And that caused me trouble because when I was ready for discharge, by that time I had ruptured part of my lower abdomen, and so before I left I had to have an operation. And it was when I had that operation I was in bed, and that must have been, that's at the end of it, wasn't it? Because I had to be interviewed for what I was going to do when I came out of the Air Force. And the duty officer came round and he asked me, what are you going to do when you get out? And I thought for a minute. I said, I think I'd like to be a doctor. And he said, OK. And it all started from there. When I came back here, of course, I had to have, there was 32 blokes and me, and the teacher said, I'm not having a woman in my class. So my mother came to my rescue, and we went and saw the head of the educational area, and just told him that that's really what I want to do, and we'd like to make sure that I could do that. But the teacher kept me out for a whole year. I wasted. But I didn't waste it because I did all kinds of other jobs. I did dressmaking and tailoring. I was the demonstrator at Fitzgerald's for Nescafe when it first was introduced here. I was a hello girl down at the exchange. I did a whole lot of things in that year. And then the next year, of course, I turned up and I got a very, well, not a good reception, but it was interesting that at the end of that year, when we all graduated, the teacher told me, when I made the presentation, that it was the best class he'd ever had, because the influence of a woman on all these kind of young men, they were all very respectful and caring, and I think that I felt that we did a good job.
Yeah, excellent contribution.
And we used to go every Saturday. Half a dozen of them used to go with me, and we'd go up onto the mountain and have a steak up there, and they'd come down.
Yeah, okay.
Come down, and it's absolutely magic up there. because when the sun comes up, everything turned pink. It really was absolutely fascinating. I really do want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to tell you how much I've learnt about myself and the changes I have made after my call to duty when I joined the work. When I first started to write a little bit about this, what I was doing was, it was all me, me, me. What I did, what I thought, what I felt. And I suddenly realised that without my joining up, I wouldn't have had a life like this. I think that I have had the most fantastic life, supported everything that I needed was given to me, even though it was very small amounts. You know, I lived on £3.7 and 6 for the first 3 years, like everybody else. But the other people who only did 3 years university, they got their knickers in a knot. And they said it wasn't fair that the medics were all getting 6 years. So when I went to Malaysia to work, I sent the money back every month, so that I paid for the second 3 of the 6. And I thought that was, I had mixed feelings about it, because studying isn't that easy, as Doug said. You really have to put your nose to the grindstone, because there's a lot of work, and you need to do a lot of thinking. And they were already out earning their money while we were still being trained.